U.S. missiles and what might potentially happen.
1,000 days of war, and Ukraine's parliament is still standing. Still populated by elected Ukrainian MPs. So, a moment to reflect on that, and on the people who died to make sure it's still the case. Then, it was back to business. In the early hours, American ATACMS in operation. This video set to show the launch. Ukraine fired the long-range ballistic missiles into Russia after permission was finally granted by President Biden yesterday. Russia's defense ministry said the strike targeted the Bryansk region bordering Ukraine to the north. It said 5 missiles were shot down and 1 damaged, with its fragments causing a fire at a military facility. Looking at this explosion, though, it must have been a very big fragment. The Russian foreign minister at the G20 meeting in Brazil described it as an escalatory gear shift.
If long-range missiles are going to be applied from Ukraine into Russian territory, it will also mean that they are operated by American experts, military experts. And we will be taking this as a qualitatively new phase of the Western war against Russia, and we'll react accordingly.
So what does that mean? The reason it took Joe Biden so long to give permission to use the system in this way was fear that Vladimir Putin would retaliate with a tactical nuclear weapon, for example. That saber-rattling would become button-pressing. Biden is bowing out, having concluded that after 2 years of rhetoric, Moscow is, for now, bluffing. Remember, once upon a time, the US agonized over, but eventually sent, Abrams tanks, Patriot missile systems, HIMARS, F-16s, now ATACMS, and already boundaries being pushed, perhaps, around how they're used. Yesterday, it was reported that the Americans would only allow the system's use to target the Kursk region inside Russia, part of which is under Ukrainian control. This morning's strike, though, was here in Karachev, in the Bryansk area next door. In Kyiv this evening, 1,000 candles for 1,000 days. On one of those days, Yulia had to leave now occupied Mariupol.
What are the consequences of this? Realistically, nothing changed in my opinion. I mean, we'll see. Russia has routinely stated that if they lower their restrictions on how American weapons can be used, they will be considered an act of war. And he has talked about how he considers this to be a war with all NATO partners, all coalition partners. So I guess what that means is that I don't think Russia will, attack the United States. But then again, I'm not making any predictions because we know how that unfolds every time I make predictions about Vladimir Putin. But I think in the interim period, the biggest targets would probably be Ukraine and then European partners. If Russia get drawn to attack NATO, won't they shatter their own army? They could barely invade Ukraine. So charitable chinchilla. There's a concept called mutually assured destruction. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Russia, when it was the USSR, greatly engaged in a nuclear arms race. And they did this because America had nukes, and America had shown that it not only had the capability of not only did they have these nuclear weapons, but these weapons of mass destruction, they also had the willingness to use it, right? They did that twice in Japan. So Russia looked at that and was like, oh my God, we got to build our own shit because they're going to, the USSR saw what happened and was like, if these guys fucking, swing the crosshairs in our direction with nuclear arms, they will destroy the USSR or anybody else that they want to destroy. So they very quickly got to work. Okay. And, there was some cross-pollination of parties that were involved in the creation of nukes that may or may not have leaked details of how the USSR could maybe build their own. And then they did. They got to work and created what is known as, this mutually assured destruction principle, nuclear armed deterrence. The idea is that if any of these two countries that have nukes, if any two countries that have nukes would ever get into direct war with one another, hot war, not cold, not like by way of proxies, but direct war with one another, that the nuclear option would be entertained. And what that means is, it would never get to military conflict with boots on the ground warfare between these two nations with nuclear arms. It would just be nukes being launched in either direction, causing a nuclear holocaust. Now, in an effort to, minimize that damage, what the American government has done is basically set up what is known as a nuclear sponge. A lot of the nuclear silos are very far away from massive population centers that are densely packed with people. And the goal for any nuclear nation would be to eliminate the nuclear silos. Everybody knows where they're at. So they would attack the 5 states, including but not limited to Montana.
My life is turned upside down. There is no life for me. I only want victory and to return home.
What really matters now is what will the next American administration do? Will talk of rolling back military aid to Ukraine materialize? It's 62 days until Donald Trump becomes president.
Well, thousands of miles away at the G20 summit in Brazil, Sir Keir Starmer said Ukraine must be put in the strongest possible position to win. But many leaders with him at the summit are far less supportive of Ukraine. And when Donald Trump is president again in 2 months' time, international backing could be weaker. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Rio now. Gary.
Well, as you suggest, Donald Trump is on everyone's mind here, the implications of his presidency and the implications of what's going on in Ukraine, but not really part of the formal proceedings. And that's partly because of the nature of this organization, the people around the table. Brazil, the host, didn't want to be talking about Ukraine here and made sure they weren't. They don't really want to choose between East and West. You've got people like Sergei Lavrov here, who you just heard in Porok's report, and you've also got people like President Erdogan. In his close of summit press conference, he said that NATO, of which he is
Mr. Play both sides and always come on top, baby. Erdogan. Reis Erdogan. Recently finished the development of Bayraktar 3 missiles, or not missiles, drones, which now have the capability, first ever in the world, as far as I understand, of launching from a aircraft carrier in the short distance of an aircraft carrier. Bayraktar 3, baby. Now, who would use such a thing? The Bayraktars. I think we all know the answer to that. Ukraine has been using them.
is a member really should sit and take notice of what President Putin is warning about nuclear retaliation for use of long-range missiles. He sounded pretty pro-Trumpy. The G20 is spawned of the very pro-Western G7, but it didn't feel like that at all here this week. And there's one particular vignette you come away with, watching the movements of President Xi this week. He's been having, not always a very sociable man, meetings with just about everybody in the room, leaders, representatives of the countries. It's almost as if the guy here from the Vatican is the only person he hasn't actually sat down and talked to. And he's trying to make contacts, get influence, get his message across for that post-Trump world, which this summit ushers in. The G20 family photo, take two. Yesterday's snap was 3 leaders short, including President Biden. Today, leaders were reconvened. Diplomats have complained about the efficiency of the G20 hosts. President Lula looked taken aback when officials told him this one was a few leaders short too, including Keir Starmer. They bunched up on the front row to hide the gap. President Lula wanted poverty and climate change centre stage at Brazil's G20, not Ukraine. President Zelensky was told he couldn't address the gathering of world leaders in...
Someone said Keir Starmer scolded Xi about human rights. Lamau, it did not go well. There's nothing funnier than, like, every Western government currently engaging in and directly funding and offering political cover for Israel doing a genocide, and then turning around and telling other countries that are not doing that they're violating human rights. Like, you have no leg to stand on the international stage. That's, I mean, I'm sorry. Like what a fucking joke that is, dude. Like, does the Chinese government violate human rights laws? Of course they do. Okay? They do. Of course. Virtually every nation state does. Is it appropriate? No, it's not. But it is fucking ridiculous to try and state that and to, engage in this tut-tut finger wagging while you are permanently in the tank for Israel's genocide. That's ridiculous. No one looks at this and goes, well, that's a valid point, unless they're primed. Unless they are the most invested, the most like Western chauvinist, brainwashed fucking weirdos on the planet. Here's the Keir telling Xi off video.
Very pleased that my Foreign Secretary and Foreign Minister Wang met recently and discussed respective concerns, including human rights and parliamentary sanctions, Taiwan, South China Sea, and our shared interest in Hong Kong. We are concerned by reports of Jimmy Lai's deterioration, health in prison. You raised the Chinese embassy building in London when we spoke on the telephone, and we have since taken action by calling in that application. Now we have to follow the legal process and timeline.
What is happening?
I'm very pleased that my Foreign Secretary and Foreign Minister Wang met recently and discussed respective concerns, including human rights and parliamentary sanctions, Taiwan, South China Sea, and our shared interest in Hong Kong. We are concerned by reports of Jimmy Lai's deterioration.
Yeah, China is straight up nabbing all the fucking leadership of the pro-Hong Kong, like Hong Kong liberation protests. Not all of them, but a decent amount. And they're prosecuting them. And that is unacceptable. I don't disagree with that. I don't care that it's like CIA backed or whatever the fuck. You can't do that. Okay? That's not appropriate nor acceptable. You could say that it's like CIA backed. I just don't give a shit is my point. Okay? And before people go, excuse me, what are you supposed to do? Like, this is direct intervention, direct infiltration of, like, China. It's like, dude, China, I always go to the dichotomy between China and Russia. Look at the way China operates. Look at the way Russia operates. One is clearly better than the other. Okay? Nice OTAN propaganda. Shut up. This is not OTAN propaganda. You're an ultra? Wait, what? I don't think people understand where I'm coming from. No. Well, they're not arresting Palestine activists. What are you talking about? No, they're arresting the Free Hong Kong activists. My argument is China's best policy in this situation. China's best policy in this situation is basically to continue doing whatever the fuck it's doing, which is kicking back.
Rio, but Washington's decision to authorize the use of long-range attack missiles on targets within Russia upstaged the Brazilians' agenda. Western diplomats say they hope President Xi might intervene with Russia to get President Putin to tone down the talk of nuclear weapons use. But diplomats say Xi's many separate meetings with leaders here have been focused on making connections with other countries. Now the world knows that the next occupant of the White House will be Donald Trump. Just before the G20 ended, I spoke to Keir Starmer and I started by asking him about the future for Ukraine now that Donald Trump had been re-elected. There is a very strong sense at the moment, more than a strong sense, a reality that the US appetite for funding Ukraine's war has pretty much gone. It's over. It's dried up. The EU's appetite for stepping in and utterly filling that void, well, that doesn't exist. Isn't the truth we're entering a new phase, and maybe people should start being realistic about that?
I don't think that's quite right. If you look at the money that's going in, the capability and the training that is being ramped up. But I'm absolutely clear that here at the G20, I am saying that we should double down on our support for Ukraine
but just on the
make
point
sure that
that
Ukraine has what it needs for as long as it needs, because this is day 1,000, as you
but
say.
Donald Trump says he's not.
1,000 days of Russian aggression.
Donald Trump says he's not going to do that.
Sacrifice by Ukraine.
You don't think Donald Trump's bluffing, do you?
Well, my position is very, very clear. This isn't just about sovereignty in Ukraine. It's about all of us. There's a huge impact on the United Kingdom. This is day 1,000 of aggression.
Yes, but we can't do any of that without money. And if Europe's not going to pay and America's not going to pay, we're in a new dispensation,
there is
aren't
a
we?
huge cost if Russia wins through aggression in this war.
But we might be
huge
there.
cost that we will all be paying, and that's why I've said that we cannot allow Putin to win this war, which is why I am doubling down with colleagues here at the G20 and saying we must do what's necessary.
President Zelensky wasn't even allowed to come here. The hosts didn't allow him a ticket.
I think had 6 meetings with President Zelensky
in
the 4 months that I've been in office. So we're frequently talking to President Zelensky, as are other world leaders, many of whom are here.
Yeah, let me ask you something else, because you're very clear you don't want to talk about operational matters to do with the use of long-range missiles and whether they are now authorised. I want to ask you a slightly different question. Are you confident you know because Russia has been talking about how conventional weapons could be responded to with nuclear weapons. Are you sure you know what their threshold is, what the trigger point is for that kind of reaction?
Well, I will just say again, I'm not going to comment on operational matters. And the reason for that, as anybody who knows about conflict will readily understand, Putin is the winner.
This is the liberal version of Trump being like, I have plans to deal with ISIS, but I won't tell you. That's it.
If we do so, and it undermines the Ukrainian effort. But I do think that it's important that we see the facts as they are. This is day 1,000. Russia is the aggression,
absolutely,
in breach of the UN
I ask you a specific
Charter,
question, though, about,
and
people
therefore
will
we must stand firm.
You'll appreciate people will be very worried about this, the nuclear word from Russia. Do you know what the threshold is?
Well, we must deal with the facts as they are and ensure that we are clear about who is the aggressor here. And the single simplest way to end this conflict is for Russia to walk away from its aggression. And we need to be really clear.
With Donald Trump in the White House, that's not really very likely.
There's no equivalence here between Russia and Ukraine. Russia has invaded sovereign territory.
I think the British forget that they don't have the same level of geopolitical proximity to Russia as Americans do. Like, you're the UK, brother. I know it's the furthest most point, right, on the map, but you're still in striking distance, okay? And I don't understand why. I don't understand why these fucking the pedophile island politicians think that they are just like America, sheltered from any sort of serious Russian intervention. Like, this was during the rise of NATO in the Cold War. This was a real consideration by Western European leadership, where they were like, what the fuck? What do you mean? We're not going to fucking play ball. We don't want to be a target for Russia. You are taking away our autonomy, and you are putting us in the crosshairs of the USSR. Do I think the U.S. is sheltered from Russian intervention? Yes. More sheltered than Europe, certainly. Europe is right there, dog. What do you mean? America also has better defenses too.
In Europe,
Yeah.
and now we're on day 1,000 of that conflict. It is impacting not just Ukraine, but the rest of the world, including the United Kingdom. And if we allow Putin to win this war, we will all pay a very high price.
Can I ask you more broadly about the budget?
People are so funny talking about Alaska. Please stop, chatters. Like, what do you... Yes, dude, Russia is massive, okay? I know. They're going to invade America through Alaska.
You talked about the black hole that you had to fix. And people look at the numbers, your spending numbers, and they're slightly baffled. Because you have sorted out spending in the terms you described wanting to sort it out, but for the next 2 years. Spending goes up by just over 3% for the next 2 years, and then we're way back crashing down to 1.3%. And it's left a lot of people baffled about what's going on here. In fact, someone who you've invoked a lot over the years, IFS boss Paul Johnson, the guru of these matters, actually called...
Never forget what I told you in the immediate aftermath of the Labor victory. One day you will look back at all of the things I said. I was in Croatia at the time. And in my coverage, I warned the UK that Keir Starmer, the kid starver, and his neoliberal, technocratic, austerity-focused approach to politics is going to literally cause a massive fascist reaction in the Reform Party, and they will dominate British politics. Yes, Keir Starmer is the midwife of fascism. I called it then, and my naysayers were like, I don't know about that. Every day that he behaves like this is another day where fascism is growing in momentum. Just saying.
That budget a sticking plaster. That hurts, doesn't it?
Well, what we did in the budget was fix the fundamentals. We filled the black hole, so there was a gap in our economy that the last government left, £22 billion. I could have done what the last government did, which was to pretend it wasn't there, carry on with the fiction. I wasn't prepared to do that, so we've dealt with that. But we've also put record investment, and where have we put it? Into our NHS, into our schools, so every child can go as far as their talent will take them,
That's the
and into housing. No, these are long-term. These are long-term. The investments.
I could show you the graph. You've seen the graph.
Well, you'll understand that the investment
spending goes right up, and then it comes right down.
The investment is capital investment, huge amount of investment. There've been, a number of comments about the budget, but not many people are saying you haven't invested heavily in the future of the country.
He acknowledges that, and lots of other people do as well. It's this baffling spending movement, and it makes people think that it's almost inevitable, even though she denied it the other day, that Rachel Reeves will be back for more. This isn't it on major tax takes, is it?
I think if you were to do a poll of those watching this and say, do they think the investment should go into our NHS, into our schools, and into our houses, they would agree with that.
But I'm asking, is that it? Are you coming back for more?
No, look, we've set out in the budget the terms of the budget. I'm not going to now write budgets for the future, but that was intended to be the budget that fixed the foundations. That was the purpose of it.
And just finally, you've been very clear on assisted dying. You do not want to influence that vote.
Yes.
We'll know the way you vote on the day you vote. I want to ask, some people think you are influencing it by not promising government time. And you heard in Prime Minister's Questions last week, one MP, but I think he speaks for many others, who'd feel more encouraged to vote for this if they thought there was proper time to debate it. And you could do that. You could give government-protected time to do it. And because you haven't done that, they're suspicious that deep down you've got fingers crossed behind your back, and this cause that you've always supported, you actually don't want to triumph next Friday.
I do think there's sufficient time, and I think there's a very healthy debate going on about assisted suicide and assisted dying. That's going on every day, and many politicians and many others are in that debate. I know that feelings are very strongly held on both sides, and this is not party political. That's why it's important for the government to be neutral, and it's important that MPs don't feel pressurised in relation to their vote, that it is a genuinely free vote.
No fingers crossed behind your back.
No, it's a genuinely free vote.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you.
Vladimir Putin has a new warning for the United States after President Biden authorized Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the U.S. to strike inside Russia. Chief Foreign Correspondent Ian Pennell starts us off from Ukraine. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, George. Nuclear saber rattling from the Kremlin this morning, with Vladimir Putin appearing to threaten to use nuclear weapons if Ukraine fires American-made missiles into Russia. The Kremlin saying the doctrine was updated in response to what it calls the new situation. The new Russian policy essentially authorizes the use of nuclear weapons in response to what it calls, quotes, critical threats of aggression using conventional weapons. Now, remember, President Biden lifting restrictions on the ATACMS ballistic missiles, which are, of course, conventional weapons, essentially allowing them to be fired into Russia. Putin has made nuclear threats before that have proved to be hollow. A senior Ukrainian military source telling me this is blackmail, but also warning nuclear weapons are a Pandora's box that shouldn't be opened. This move likely aimed as much at President-elect Trump, who's promising to end the war when he takes office, but it'll make that all the harder. Meanwhile, Russia again escalating attacks inside Ukraine, striking an apartment block in the north, killing 9, including a...
I'm telling you right now, the scariest moment in this conflict was when I saw with my own 2 eyes Defense Department spokespeople, okay? The Defense Department spokespersons going on CNN, okay? And straight up saying, if Russia actually used a tactical nuke, a mini nuke, in Ukraine, it wouldn't be that consequential. That is not a moment that I have let go of. It lives in my mind permanently. That was really terrifying because to me, that meant like, oh yeah, they're not going to defend Ukraine, and they're not going to, they're not going to engage in like mutually assured destruction to defend Ukraine or even the threat of it, and that they're gearing the American public to be comfortable with parts of Ukraine being nuked. That was a wild week. So, just something to remember if you want to understand where or what the American interests are really. Oh my God.